It's the Twinspires Racing Roundtable. I'm Ashley Anderson here with James Scully and Vance Hansen. We'll be covering a whole lot of Breeders' Cup prep action from over the weekend. We had Del Mar and Saratoga hosting Breeders' Cup preps, and we'll also talk some performances that caught our eye from over the weekend. But Vance, let's start with the Jockey Club Gold Cup on Sunday, actually, at Saratoga, where Highland Falls won a 1.25 miles, punched his ticket to the Breeders' Cup Classic. So what do you rate his chances ahead of the Classic?
Well, Highland Falls perhaps was born to win a Breeders' Cup race to start with. He is by Curlin, who won the Breeders' Cup Classic in 2007. His dam was Round Pond, who won the Breeders' Cup Distaff at Churchill Downs, I think maybe the year before that. So, but I think what it seems he and the rest of what constitutes the older male division on dirt, I think is going to need a massive step forward to topple many of the better 3-year-olds pointing for the race. Highland Falls' victory in the Gold Cup was to an extent a tactical success. Arthur's Ride, the Whitney winner, was the fastest horse on paper, literally and figuratively. He didn't really use that speed to his best effect on Sunday like he did in the Whitney. And it was very smart tactically for the connections of Highland Falls to say, go after him. And they did pressure Arthur's Ride into submission. So it was a good performance on Highland Falls' part, a 4-length win, very strung out field. The depth of which I think is doubtful now, kind of looking at it after the fact. The pace dynamics at Del Mar, I think, figure to be different, and Highland Falls, I think, will be among a glut of runners hoping to rally from mid-pack or off the pace. 2 months out, I have kind of doubts whether he is fast enough and really good enough to win the Classic right now, but that could change in the next few months, James.
Yes, I really don't view Highland Falls Breeders' Cup Classic chances favorably. Vance made a lot of good points. I mean, this was just another classic example with Junior Alvarado not using early speed runner speed to his advantage. And you can just look at Arthur Ride's Brisnet E1 pace numbers are like 10 points lower than the Whitney. Now, Arthur's Ride flashed speed, but at this point, he's got to go on with it. They run this second quarter mile in the Jockey Club Gold Cup in like 24.5 seconds. And it's just, I thought he allowed Highland Falls to sit too close to him. Those moderate internal splits really benefited that horse. And you can look at Highland Falls, all 3 of his wins this year, whether it's that Fairgrounds allowance race, he was able to race up close to the pace in that allowance. In the Grade 3 Blame Stakes, he was able to basically track Cagliostro, the pace setter, in second that day and take over when he gave away in the stretch. And once again, it's another favorable up-close trip in the Jockey Club. Do I think he'll get this trip in Del Mar in the Breeders' Cup Classic? No, I don't. I think there'll be more legitimate speed, and I don't think he'll be able to keep up and sustain his run like he did in this race. Vance mentioned it. It looks like, to me, the competition is just going to get a lot deeper. I didn't think Sunday's Pacific Classic was a strong field of older horses. And then once again, in this Jockey Club Gold Cup, you can see Arthur's Ride. He's odds on off of a convincing win in the Whitney where he got out to a clear early lead and put his speed to good use. This race here, he doesn't run well at all. He's off the board. Tapit Trice, who was the second choice, he runs like 4th. He's under a rod before the end of the far turn. And we have a horse, Pyrenees, who comes running late for 2nd, and Disarm gets up for 3rd. But it's tough to envision that the Jockey Club Gold Cup this year will have a serious impact. As far as Highland Falls, to his credit, I do think 1.25 mile distance, Ashley and Vance, is his best trip. So I wouldn't count out a potential minor award, but that would be the best case scenario. And I don't view his win chances favorably at all in the Breeders' Cup Classic.
I'm with you. We had a 101 Brisnet speed figure, tied a career best, but that's still, a couple points below Fierceness in his last 2. Though if you look at class rating with Brisnet, Highland Falls got a 125 that matches what City of Troy got in the Juddmonte International, but He was weakening in that final furlong. His final time was a second slower than Mixto over at Del Mar in the Pacific Classic. So I wouldn't say, he's by any means a top contender in the Breeders' Cup Classic, but maybe on his best day he could pull off an upset, but he's definitely right now a step below the top contenders in that race. Well, let's move over to the other win in your in events from this weekend. So, James, what were your takeaways from those races?
Well, I'll mention the Green Flash, which was a win in your end for the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. It was held at Del Mar at the same 5 furlong distance. They're going to run the Turf Sprint this fall. And after dropping his first 2 starts this year, Matorius rebounded in the Green Flash. He won this race for the 2nd year in a row. And I really thought it was a bold late run to get up late in here. It really showed that turn of foot that has been really favorable at Del Mar. And he is now 3 for 3, Matorius is, on Del Mar's turf. All 3 of those races have come at 5 furlong distance. So, he's going to be in with a chance in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. Now, this year's Turf Sprint, it looks like it's going to feature a deeper field than last year, potentially with Cogburn. He's going to run this Saturday, Kentucky Downs, but he set a world record when winning the Jaipur earlier this season, I believe at Aqueduct or at Saratoga. And he's going to be the horse to beat in that turf sprint if he runs well this Saturday. But Matorius is going to be in with a chance. He was actually favored in last year's Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint at Santa Anita, but he doesn't run as well. He lost his last 2 starts at Santa Anita, didn't have the cleanest trip last year. And like I said, he's just way better at Del Mar. So he's going to be he's going to be a contender for Phil D'Amato. He runs well fresh, and he's going to train up to the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint off of Saturday's win in the Green Flash. Vance.
Yeah, I agree with you that the Green Flash was probably the most important of the win in your ins this week, and based on who won. Matorius, as you said, 3 for 3 now over 5 furlongs on the Del Mar turf. As you said, beaten favorite in the race at Santa Anita last year, and Cogburn perhaps is too dominant a division leader for him to topple, all things being equal, and I would probably believe that whether Cogburn wins this weekend at Kentucky Downs or not. Cogburn actually didn't win at Kentucky Downs when he tried that race last year, so he's going to be a formidable foe for Matorius, but of all the other winning year-in races this past weekend, I think the Green Flash probably has the best chance of producing a Breeders' Cup winner. Some of the other races that were winning year-in races over the weekend were not very substantive. The Pacific Classic was one of the weakest renewals in race history and was won by a horse still eligible for his entry-level allowance condition. And if not for the fact that Del Mar is firmly in the Breeders' Cup site rotation, the Del Mar handicap, which is 1 3/8 miles on the turf, arguably wouldn't even be a win in your in for the turf, given its grade 2 status and its relatively modest purse. And then the other race, Breeders' Cup win in your in on the weekend, was the Flower Bowl at Saratoga. And Idea Generation for Chad Brown stole this race wire to wire over soft ground. And she might not even go for the filly and mare turf because Brown said after the race that this filly really needs needs to be a lone speed situation for her to excel at, and soft ground. Neither of those circumstances are going to be likely at Del Mar, so she may pass the race altogether. And if there's one horse to take out of the Flower Bowl, it would likely be runner-up Warlike Goddess. She might still be good enough to get a piece of the purse at the Breeders' Cup filly and mare turf, even at the advanced age of 7. But otherwise, outside the Jockey Club Gold, or outside the Green Flash, I should say the win in your in races failed to kind of deliver this weekend, in my opinion, Ashley.
I'm with you. We had, the scratch of Adair Manor really changed everything with the Pacific Classic. And then really the Del Mar handicap was kind of what I was going to talk about with Gold Phoenix winning the 3rd straight year. But going up in the Breeders' Cup turf, facing Aidan O'Brien, a 7-time winner, you've got all these Charlie Appleby runners. I just don't think he's really got much of a chance in the Breeders' Cup turf. So Really, it's Notorious for Phil D'Amato. He had a great weekend. Phil D'Amato had a great weekend at Del Mar, and he actually won the Del Mar handicap. This was the 9th time in 11 years, so he's dominated that race pretty much over the last decade. But really, Notorious is, of all the horses this week that got, a berth to the Breeders' Cup, that's probably the one that has the best chance of any that we saw this weekend, aside from maybe Warlike Goddess, as you mentioned. But I do think, she's probably a step behind previous seasons.
She's run well at a mile and 3/8, but I think a mile and a half is her best distance. But I do think she'd be better suited with going with the Phil Mare turf at a mile and 3/8. So be interested to see what.
Because she's done the Breeders' Cup turf the last 2 seasons, but does it seem like she's going to go Philly and Mare turf?
I just think the competition might, with the competition might be a better option in terms of, where to spot her. But the distance has always been the determining factor before. So Mott's got a decision to make, but, you've got to figure that's probably going to be her final career start. Then she's going to finally head to the breeding shed.
Well, we had some other stakes action this past weekend. So, Vance, what caught your eye?
Well, the Hopeful Stakes on Monday, the closing day feature at Saratoga. The winner was Chancer McPatrick, now 2 for 2 for trainer Chad Brown. And this colt showed a lot of innate class to overcome a lot of trouble. He hit the gate at the start for one, and then he severely bumped a rival a few steps later. And all of this affected jockey Flavian Pratt, too, because he briefly lost his iron. The two of them finally recovered quickly and were certainly aided by the fast pace set in the Hopeful by Smokin' Wicked, the Louisiana bred, who I thought ran one of the better races in the Hopeful, but appears to be a bit distance limited in the long term. Ferocious was the odds-on favorite in the Hopeful. He was the darling of the bettors here off a big maiden win earlier in the meet. He did seem to lose a little bit of focus and upper stretch before getting involved again in the latter stages, and he ran Chancer McPatrick to a half-length defeat there. And then Chad Brown had another horse in here, Incentive Play, who tried to make a rally up the inside and deep stretch. Kind of hung a little bit, didn't quite have the kick as the top 2 finishers, but he ran a nice race for third as well. So I thought this was a pretty decent edition of the Hopeful. Chancer McPatrick and Incentive Play, both trained by Chad Brown. He's going to be looking at the Champagne and the Breeders' Futurity for both of these horses. I suppose one will go in one race and the other will go in the other one. So Chancer McPatrick off this nice win is one of the favorites for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile now. I would remain a bit cautious, though, because of his deep closing running style. It's not always the most effective one to have, especially when stretching out the 2 turns. And his stablemate Sierra Leone could certainly tell him about something like that, James.
Yeah, one thing, though, about him, a lot of times and he'll have to prove himself at 2 turns. I mean, despite pedigree, sometimes these horses aren't like longer distance types. But Chancer McPatrick is bred for longer. I mean, his dam was a graded stakes-winning 2-turn type. His lone sibling to race was a 2-turn type. So with McKenzie on top, who got some speed, he ran second in the Breeders' Cup Classic himself, and then all the stamina on the female side. Chancer McPatrick looks pretty good for longer distances based on pedigree. I thought that was – I did think Ferocious. It looked like he was languishing in mid-stretch and was going nowhere. And when Chancer McPatrick ran past him, he seemingly just like latched onto the back of his saddle and came with a good late run. But all 3 of the top 3 finishers in the Hopeful were all impressive maiden winners, I thought, earlier in the meet. So I did think that the quality was pretty solid in that field. For my what else, I'm going to turn to the Arkansas I'm going to turn to Muth, who made his first start since winning the Arkansas Derby back in late March. He returned with a victory in Sunday's Shared Belief Stakes at Del Mar. I will say this, he came under a rod leaving the far turn to fend off a challenger and continued to be pretty hard ridden to the wire to win by 2 lengths. But, he had every right to need a race off the layoff. That wasn't, coming back at a 2-turn mile stakes like that isn't always easy. And he could continue to move forward off that performance. He's going to head to the $1 million California Crown that used to be the Awesome Again. It's on September 28th. That race 1 1/8 miles, and with a strong showing there, Muth will just add his name to the roster of 3-year-old contenders for the Breeders' Cup Classic. So a solid comeback effort. I think he'll keep progressing upon it, and we'll see if he does so in late September. I'll also mention for Del Mar, Hope Road. This is a filly that ran against Tamara last year a couple times, was winless from 3 starts. She got transferred to Bob Baffert this year. She broke her maiden by 5, won an entry-level allowance by 5, both races at 6 furlongs. She stretched out to a 2-turn mile in the Torrey Pines on Saturday and looked awesome doing it. Not only did she really look good, but the filly that ran second was the filly that won the Grade 2 Santa Anita Oaks earlier this year, so she flattered her in a sense. Baffert's going to stretch her out to the Zenyatta, which is 1 1/16 in early October. She could be headed for the distaff, but the filly mare sprint is going to be an option for Hope Road because she's by Quality Road, but she's out of Marley's Freedom, and that she won the Grade 1 Ballerina, a bunch of sprint stakes. In fact, never ran at 2 turns. So she's all speed on her damn side. Hope Road is, in a sense, at least with her, with Marley's Freedom. And finally, I'll mention Bright Work, who came back. She was supposed to run in the test earlier in the meet, flipped over in the paddock. They scratched her for just precautionary reasons. And she came back with a real, I thought, strong showing in the Prioris at, I might have said Prioris earlier instead of Torrey Pines and Del Mar, but Bright Work was in the Prioris Saturday at Saratoga. And really, the pace setter in this race, we're seeing the replay right here, is Too Sharp. And I thought she ran a terrific race for second. I thought the top 2 in this race are both fillies to watch moving forward. They're both, to me, like candidates for the filly mare sprint. I look at the filly mare sprint, and yeah, you're going to have Sweet Azteca, Society, and Baba, but there's nobody else out there. And those horses all have to get there too. So I think these are 2 upward 3-year-old fillies with a lot more to offer. Bright Work is now 5 for 5 at 1-turn distances. Her only poor showings came at 2 turns. I think she's got more to offer off of this race. She won the Spinaway last year by open lengths, is a very talented 1-turn sprint prospect for John Ortiz. And like I said, the runner-up, Too Sharp, who was odds-on for Phil Bauer, had just broken her maiden by 11.5 lengths in her second start. She's another filly seemingly with a bright future. So I thought this was a real strong running of the Prioris on Saturday by 2 fillies that are in with the chance for the filly mare sprint this fall. Ashley.
Well, speaking of the Spinaway, I wanted to mention Immersive getting a second career win for Brad Cox, a Nyquist filly. She improved her Brisnet speed figure to a 91 after winning on debut and getting an 82. It's a Godolphin homebred, and there are really only 2 late runners in this race, and I went with the other late runner who finished 3rd, so I picked the wrong one. But Immersive came through and won by 1 1/4 lengths over a muddy sealed track. And then now we'll probably point to the Grade 1 Alcibiades, which is a prep for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. And Brad Cox won the Alcibiades and the Juvenile Fillies with British Idiom a couple of seasons ago. So looking to do it here. But I did want to note, last year we saw Brad Cox had about 13 colts, 7 fillies that were in the mix for the Roads, the Kentucky Derby, and the Oaks. So it's too soon to say if this is his top filly. He's probably going to have quite a few in the mix, but one to circle for sure. And it's interesting. You don't see a lot of Brad Cox runners go off around, like 12 to 1, 10 to 1. And this filly both times has been sent off as kind of a long shot. So I expect she'll get respected in the Alcibiades, but a very good filly to keep your eye on going forward. And Brad Cox had a great weekend too. He had 5 wins from Friday to Sunday to close out the Saratoga meet, had 14 wins overall. Of course, got a Grade 1 win here and in the Jockey Club Gold Cup, and also won the Grade 3, I believe it's Saranac, with West Hollywood. So a very good overall meet for Brad Cox. No surprise.
I always said Saranac, but I might have it wrong. I also thought the runner-up there, really a really good effort. I mean, nice filly for John Ortiz. So That sloppy track, that wet track, I thought might have helped Immersive a little bit, but Quiet Side I thought ran huge, and the top two are very promising, like you said, especially the winner.
A few to add to your stable alerts. Well, that's all the time we have for the Racing Roundtable. We'll be back next Tuesday to recap a whole lot of stakes action. James and I will be at Kentucky Downs covering a whole bunch of stakes action as well this weekend, so check out our social channels to follow along, and we'll see you next time.
When it comes to horse racing, you can never have too much information. With Twinspires, you can place your bets with confidence, whether you use handicapping insights like our Brisnet speed ratings, prime power and past performances, the guidance of our experts' top picks, or just choose a name that catches your eye. Yes! No matter how you pick your horse, bet with Twinspires. And now you can race to victory with Twinspires tournaments.